hold on just a moment and I'll be ready to show my handsome face. I say this with cynicism and sarcasm. Let me pop out the chat so I can pull it up without completely covering what I'm working on. And presto. How you doing, baby girl? Yes. Well, welcome to the next stage of sculpting the Tarrasque. Now, back on Tuesday, I started the rigging on it, and I showed in the video how I handle the weight mapping. I didn't show the entirety of the weight mapping. I went ahead and finished that in the time between then and now. So we have a fully rigged Tarrasque, ready and waiting on what's going to be called an HD morph, or a high definition morph. It's a blend shape that doesn't affect the base geometry, it affects the fully subdivided geometry. And that will enable us to give it an enormous amount of detail that doesn't get too badly deformed during posing. And that way we can also have this ultra high res detail in whatever pose we put him in. So for example, he's got the full detail, but then have him rearing forward and that detail stays in place. It's got the wrinkles, it's got the neck bits, the scales and the scutes and plates and everything. So I hear a jingling collar. What a surprise, huh? No. No, little buddy. You got me? Don't you even think about it, okay? Really? Go figure. Ralph, just because you hear me talking doesn't mean it's time to come in and be on the channel. Come on. Up you go. Yeah. Down you go. Good boy. Okay. Now, I'm going to wait a little bit for at least a couple more people to come into the chat over here so that I can make sure that people are actually present to see what I'm about to do. Because this is a situation where you don't want to miss steps. It's a good idea if you come in late into the show to go ahead and rewatch the beginning of this one. It's, because I'm going to have to discuss some things that really and truly this video is the point at which what I can do is not what everyone can do, because I have an unfair advantage in this particular point. But it's possible, I think, to do with Blender. I don't know. Maybe Maya, because Maya's recently started adding a sculpting sub-app. But I'm not certain. I would need to find out. No, fuzzbutt. I would need to find out from a Blender maestro, a master of the blender, the king of the blending. And will it blend? Yes, it will, because I can do it. But that's beside the point. Anyway, so like I said, we've got the show going now. I'm waiting on some more people. The plan is, once I get this Tarrasque fully sculpted and the details in, then I'm going to make two versions. I haven't decided what the two poses will be. Probably one far more combative than the other. Maybe one running and one and then release them. They won't be on Thingiverse. And hello, Largashbur! I don't know if the optional If there's even an option for... no, there's only annotations. There's not... Look like there's an option for closed captioning. But yeah. Anyway, waiting on people right now. The more people we get in here. Yes. All right. Okay. We have 4 people in. 4. So, I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to get started going and explaining exactly what it is that I'm about to do. So, this is the rigged and undetailed Tarrasque. And it's all rigged. It's all ready for posing. But I need to detail it. Now, what I'm about to do, I have a kind of an unfair advantage. What I'm about to do is called a high definition morph, or high density morph, and I. Ralph? No. No. Not while I'm working. Ow. No. There you go. Yeah, the Tarrasque. This one's 13 years old. That one is 6. Anyway, what I'm going to do, while it is in what's called a 0 pose, which is with all of the joints at 0, I'll go to Edit, Figure, Geometry, Convert to Sub D. That means it gives it a layer of subdivision. Now, I've already done that on this figure. So I go to High Resolution, and I change this to 3. Now, to show you exactly what that means, I'm going to zoom in on the thumb here. Okay? Once it finishes going through the cycle, you can see I've got a slow computer. There we go. And then I'm going to turn on Wire Texture Shaded. Where you see the thicker lines is the actual polygons of the figure. Where you see the thinner lines, that's the subdivision levels. Now, as you can see, with 3 levels of subdivision, that's 2, 4, 8 polygons horizontally and vertically on each quad, which means 64 polygons per polygon. Which means, in this case, for the figure, for the Tarrasque figure, this goes up to over 5 million polygons. Now, the thing is, because this is going to be a blend shape or morph, I can't do anything that would change the number of polygons, such as dynameshing. Everything I have to do in this level of detail. I'll go ahead and change back to texture shaded, just because, get rid of all that outline. File, export, and we're going to call this simply Tarrasque HD Detail. Accept. And now it's going to take a while to export. While it does, while it's exporting, it'll take a few. Let's go ahead and just see what's going on in chat. By the way, welcome, Fish Monster Girl. I have actually 3 Tarrasques. You never want them jumping up on your tabletop. It's bad news all around. Now, it's still taking the time to write. Yeah, let's go ahead and move this over here so I can see it while shooting the breeze in the chat. Again, it's 5 million polygons. It's going to take a while to define every vertex and then every connection between every other vertex. It's once that's done, I'm actually going to be closing down Daz Studio until I've finished with the sculpt. The reason being is because this is going to use up an enormous amount of resources sitting here like this. And here we are in ZBrush. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to import, whoops, that's the orc horde. Where did that come from? Where it says Tarrasque HD Detail. That's 588 meg for the file. And it's going to take a few to load, and you'll see it come up here in place of the star when it's done loading. You'll also see it orange bar across the top. While it's doing that, I may as well go ahead and get some soda. And before you ask, yes, I use that mug for my cans all day, every day, all the time. And there we go. We have the Tarrasque instead of the polymesh. We click in the middle, drag down to draw it in, and then click on Edit. Now here's the thing. You remember how slow Daz Studio was working? So what we have, let's go ahead and just start with the tongue. Actually, no, what we really need to do is we need to go down to this area here called Layers. Because what we're going to do is we're going to do one layer for the overall biological details, like the thicker vein that goes down the neck and some of the wrinkles and bits in the skin. We're going to use another layer for just the surface scaling details, scales and scutes and things like that. And another layer for detailing on the shell here. Now the thing is, before we leave ZBrush, we're going to combine all those layers together into one, like collapsing layers in a Photoshop document. So we're going to start with a new layer. We're going to change the name to Bio Details. We're going to create another new layer. I'm going to change the name to Skin Details. And a third new layer. I'm going to change the name to Shell Details. Now we're going to start on Bio Details. We're going to turn off the visibility of the other two. Okay. I'm going to come in here, frame in, and I'm going to hit X to make sure we have symmetry here. And let me grab a godsend for sculpting, Wacom. And of course, what's Wacom without a wonderful little stylus and a Green Lantern stylus holder. Alright, shrink down the mouse, turn on. This button lets you remember what size each individual brush is, so you don't have to have them, keep changing your brush sizes. We're also going to go to stroke, lazy mouse, and turn off lazy mouse for a standard. We're not using it now, but we're going to. We're going to switch over to slash and drop that down to about there. What we're going to do is we're going to kind of go in, and then we're going to smooth that. Then we're going to come under the tongue a little bit. We're going to hit the number 1 to do it again. Then we're going to smooth it. This will fully define that tongue without completely, Now the next thing we're going to do, we're going to inflate, we're going to shrink the mouse down a little bit. And we're going to decrease this intensity, and we're just going to inflate out the sides of the tongue. Especially up here. Now we're going back to slash. We're really decreasing the strength, and we're increasing the size a little. And what we're going to do is we're going to kind of bring it up the center. And then smooth it a bit. So it helps shape the tongue. Bigger, kind of pull the tongue a bit further forward into the lower jaw. And then kind of pull these out into the side. Because we want it to fill most of the lower jaw, because that's what a real tongue does. There we go. Now I hit Control Shift into the middle to summon the entire rest of the Tarrasque. And we're going to just start focusing on the head here. Now you'll notice that there is a hole in the geometry right near the eye. There's a reason we're not going to worry about that right now, and that's that it's going to be taken care of when all's said and done. We're going to switch to slash again. We're going to increase the intensity. And we're going to shrink it just a bit. And we're actually going to better define the eye itself. First with the slash around where the eye is. Then with a slight smoothing, I'll need a bit stronger, around this area to kind of round out the eye. Then, back to our inflate, we're going to inflate the eye itself. There. Now when we look from the front, we can see both eyes. Next thing is we're going to the mouth. Basically, we're doing biological details here. We're not doing the scales or anything like that. We're we're going to make this a bit bigger. We're going to further define the jawbone where it overlays the skin on top of the jaw muscle. Yes, this is actually the jaw muscle right here. Now, go under here. And then we're going to go kind of down and down here. We're also going to go ahead and just add in just a bit of shaping here. Okay. Now, the next thing that we need to worry about is corner of the jaw here. Let's make the mouth a little bit bigger, or a lot bigger, but not as strong. I'm going to kind of define the edge of the jaw here, and then smooth it. Because we don't want it necessarily to be a sharp corner right there yet. That's what we're going to do, is we're going to make it even bigger and even weaker, and come around like that, and then smooth. Well, shrink it and then smooth. And we're using pressing the number 1 to get repetition. Lids and bags. So we're going to use this weak and hit it once again. As you can see, that's getting a nice shape to it. We're going to then blend out the ends here. We're going to do the same thing here for the top of the eye. Again, this will be something that will end up blending with the scales that we end up putting up there. When it comes to the neck, most of what we're about to do is going to be hidden, or most of what we're about to do, we won't have to worry about the scale, about the shell. Okay, for the neck area, we're going to go back to plate. We're going to increase the draw size a little. And we're going to kind of draw here. And then let's kind of refine. And instead of just hitting 1, we're only going to kind of go back over some areas, because we want it to be subtle transition instead of being all of a sudden everything everywhere is getting suddenly bigger and thicker and slash rather, but we're going to add. We're going to use this. We're going to add some. We're going to add some wrinkles to this area. And then smooth them out at the base. And then we're going to shrink them down. We're going to add in a few more. And again, smooth out the ends of these wrinkles, because We're then going to go to a much lower add and a much larger brush size. We're going to kind of add in another trait that's on some of these larger monitor lizard type reptiles that might be present. Just that little bit there. And now we're going to switch back to subtract. And we're going to shrink. We're going to add in a few more wrinkly bits under the neck. We're also going to add some under here. We're going to turn off X. We're also going to increase the intensity just a little bit, because we want this to be a little bit asymmetrical. And then we're going to go to inflate, make it bigger and a little bit weaker. So we want this to be more of a subtle transition down here. We're going to add in a little bit, and then move. We don't want move topological, we want straight up move. We're going to make it kind of bigger. We're going to grab this dead center and pull it down. We're going to do it. Oh. We're going to turn on X so we can do this properly. We're going to grab dead center, pull it down. We're going to do it in multiple pulls so that it doesn't grab too much of the chin. And then ever so slight smoothing. Yeah, that area we need to kind of smooth out quite a lot. Because we need to redefine that. And then we're going back to slash. You can see that just adding these wrinkly bits, it's looking even better. Let's add in some of these areas here. Okay. Now we're going to do something similar for this right here. I'm going to take inflate, and I'm going to kind of inflate this piece right here. I'm going to kind of bring it over to the thigh. Okay. Then we're going over to slash, and we're going to add in some of these wrinkles. And we're going to, once again, smooth out the bottom of them. No, I don't want RGB. There. And we're just going to Again, just to give it some realism. And we're going to then reduce the focal shift. I'm going to kind of draw a few bits over here. We're going to do something similar over here. We're going to add in some wrinkles at each of the joints, because contrary to popular belief, there are. Oh, that's too much intensity there, so we're going to down the intensity. Now, you might think that they won't show very well when it comes time to do the scales, but you'd be surprised. I'm going to kind of pull this up from here. And we're going to continue on here. Pardon me, just for a second. There. I had to get rid of those smudges from when I had RGB accidentally on. Turn off X, zoom out, go for the underbelly. No. I'm going to go for the underbelly under here. And I'm going to do something kind of weird. No, that's not what I wanted. Now, visibility. Alright, I see what I gotta do. Masking, inverse, visibility, hide points. There we go. This was so I could get a little bit zoom in closer, properly balanced on the belly. Because we gotta start drawing in some Okay, now I hit X so we can go back to doing it symmetrically. When we're done, this should look like it's almost like wearing a latex suit. Then we're going to start working on the scales. I'm going to use Alt to kind of dig in a little bit of wrinkles on the back of the calf. And that should be the leg. Well, no, we got to do the interior here. And it should be pretty much the leg. And then we're going to add in some wrinkles in the back of the arm here. We're going to kind of pull these wrinkles up like this. And now we're going to the tail area. We're going to start with inflate. We're going to do the same thing here that we did with the neck and the front of the thigh. We're going to kind of inflate this area just a bit to make it a bit more exaggerated of a tendon. Make it a pretty blatant, that's what that is a tendon. And then we go back to slash. Now we come in. We're going to drop that focal shift back up pretty high. And we're going to draw on our first few basic tendons. Well, not tendon, but basic skin wrinkles from the tendons. And it's looking like we need to increase the intensity a little bit and draw a few over this way. And then just a couple that way. Now when we frame out, we need to do something similar to the feet. Now we need to work on the, well, hold on, let me shrink this. We need to smooth out the tops of some of these wrinkles on here, because we don't want them to be completely, just appearing out of nowhere. Okay. Sorry it took so long to respond. Okay, now, here we're going to do the tendons on the backs of the hand. Now, tendons are actually relatively flat. So we shrunk down that focal shift. And we're going to come down from here. And that didn't, no. Not intense enough and a little bit too big. Okay, now I'll try here. Yeah. Then smooth here, and then we're going to inflate on either side to make the knuckle. Okay. Okay. This definition, to be honest, is not quite as realistic, but we want to keep it as dramatic as possible. And this is the Tarrasque. And now we're going to use inflate. I'm going to inflate around where the claws are coming out, to kind of really emphasize that they're coming out of the skin here. Okay. And then here. Okay. Now we're moving, and we're going to do that to the toes. We're going to need a slightly larger brush, but not quite as intense, because we have larger toes. Okay. Alright, that's too big of a brush. I'm drawing too much material in. Let's do it here. Yeah, that's much better. Now, I mentioned before, this only works for me because I have a secret, well, not so secret, special technique. The HD morphs that I'm using as the basis for this transformation are only available to people who work doing 3D models for brokerage at DAZ 3D. It is not yet available for the general public. However, if you use Blender or Maya, I don't know, I think what you can do is something similar. You rig it in your mid-res version in your basic modeling engine, that part of Blender, and then I think you can do this, add a sculpting modifier on top of the stack, so that the end result is that it looks, the sculpting happens to the figure after the rigging but it's happening to the base figure. I'm not sure. Okay, that is our basic biological detailing. Now when we go to layers here, we go to our skin detail layer, and we turn off bio details. We have that there. If we decide that the details aren't strong enough, we can come down here and increase them like outrageously. If we decide they're too strong, we can cut them in half. Or, you know, leave them at 1, because anything more and it's a bit too much. So we're going to turn off the bio details and focus entirely on the skin details for this one. Real quick, how many people we got? Okay, we got 5 people watching. Alright. And you're about to get that little Now, next thing we do is scales. And what we're going to do for this is we got to decide what kind of scales we want to give him. I'm of the mindset that probably the best thing to do would be to not use overlapping scales. It doesn't fit the look of the critter. That's for more small lizard, snake, and fish. This is more saurian, more monitor lizard, more alligator, crocodile, which means budded scales. Now, there's a couple ways we can do budded scales. One of the most common ways is by using what's called an alpha. For example, one of the default alphas is effectively scales. But that doesn't look as good. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and import a new alpha. Now, we're going to go to my program files, Pixelogic, ZBrush 2018, Z alphas. Leathery skin, scaly skin 22. Okay, this is, just to say it, this is more for, yeah, it's not quite as good. It's more for the really fine scales. We try for scaly skin 26, and we put it on here. And we see that this is probably good, but we're also seeing that these alphas are very low res. We don't want that. So instead what we're going to do is we're going to actually draw on all our scales, which means it's now already 8:45. We probably won't get this done tonight, which means I'm going to end up doing the end of it, you know, sometime between, you know, now and when I put it up. This will allow you all to see how I'm doing it. Also, if we turn on this, we can see that the polygons in this area are a little larger than they are in the area around the eye, for example. So we need to be careful. We're going to turn this back to dots and alpha off. And we're going to go to slash. And what we're going to do is we're going to shrink this down and increase the intensity a bit. And we're going to start off by just drawing the directions for these scales. And you'll notice that I'm actually drawing it in loops. After I do the scales around the eyes, I'm going to pause for a minute and do what are called scutes. Okay, then we're going to just go ahead and draw in. I'm not doing them very deeply. They don't look like scales yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and go to inflate, shrink it down a lot, and I'm going to inflate just a couple scales at random, just to give it a bit more organic look. Then when we go over here back to layers, we turn the bio details on. Wait a minute. What happened here? And everything I just did been poofed. And I'm not quite sure because I'm not very familiar with bio details. Well, let's turn that off. All right. What? Okay, I don't know what just happened here. All I know, let's see what happens if we just draw that and then, okay, yeah, that's what we got to do. Okay, that tells me what I have to do. Basically, get rid of the skin detail and shell detail layers, and then do the skin detail and shell details on the base figure, and then add on the bio details. You can already see the big difference there. Okay. Hello, Andy. Alright, so let me go ahead and move back over to the... Actually, let's go ahead and make our scutes first. Scutes are not cute, no matter what the sound may think. What these scutes are is they are the thicker scales that often will have a bit of a point to them or a spike on top. Like the scutes are a term for the scales on the back of an alligator or on the shell of a turtle or tortoise, or random larger scales on various spots of the larger reptiles. So what we're going to do to represent them is we're going to go ahead and we're going to use the layer brush. We're just going to draw on a few areas where there's some larger spots. We're going to start on the head. Zooming in. And first of all, I'm going to make sure that I have lazy mouse off And let's increase the intensity a good bit. Yeah, we need them bigger than that. Okay. We're going to drop this focal shift down quite a bit to 0. And yeah, there we go. That's good. We're going to just draw on a few erratic shapes and hit them with the smooth a little bit. We want to make sure there's a gap between them. Make them a little bit more intense. Because we want to make sure that they do print well when it comes time. So that those of you who print this and paint it can get some good results from it. We're wanting to try to draw them all kind of blending towards each other on this nose area. Basically, anywhere that could be rigid, we're going to make scutes. Anywhere that could be more flexible, we're going to fade them down into scales. So like around the eye, the jaw area will be more scale, whereas down here and on the forehead and nose will be more scutes. The lips will be more scale. Also, when we're getting closer to the center of the head, we're going to turn off some symmetry, because we don't want symmetrical scales. Well, not where it's clearly, obviously symmetrical. And like I say, we want a slight gap between them. So we're drawn on, we're going to put some scales in this area, because that's kind of more of a soft tissue zone. It's a bit of a tap of the smooth brush on some of these. So yeah, this area, most of the area down in this part of the face will be scale, not scute. We're gonna cut back down to here now. Oh, we don't want them to. We're also going to go to slightly larger size once we get further away from the more flexible face area. And I don't just mean draw larger ones, I mean we're going to increase the brush size. I did all of that, and I forgot to turn on symmetry. Oh well. Let's go back over here, and let's get back to going what I did over here. I just doubled up on everything. Silly me. and get back to doing these. Now those are too round. Aren't round enough, rather. And then, yeah, I need to kind of connect that on this side. And, yeah. Now on this side, let me go ahead and just to mark off where it is. That's the end of the no symmetry zone. Now, like I said, I'm probably going to go ahead and detail most of the face tonight. I'll have to detail the rest later because I won't really have time to get all of this done. But I can show you the end results of how they blend together. Okay, now let's hit X to get some symmetry. Actually, no, we don't. We want it to be off symmetry because it's near the center. Then we hit X, and we hit this key to make the scutes larger. And then we hit X again so we can get the and then we're going to hit that to make them smaller again as we get near this more flexible area that will be scales. And then we kind of draw in our asymmetric scutes. Now we're going to do the scutes on the head, on the top of the head, which will get kind of relatively large. And we're going to do this entirely asymmetric. Okay. We also have to make sure we don't accidentally put some scutes on the horns themselves. Now we're going to go back to symmetrical. While we're doing this. And we're not going to get too much further down the head because that's getting back into, that's the shell right there. And this area kind of needs to be scaled to be more flexible. Could think of it as the difference between where you would put plate armor and where you would put chainmail on a more flexible knight figure. Okay, now we're gonna come back in and do that. Now, because I mentioned before, some scutes have spikes. We're gonna turn X back on. We're gonna shrink this. And we're gonna add some spikes to a couple of these. And then smooth that. Okay. Now, that's just to show you what it ends up looking like right now with the bio details. We're going to get into more, we're going to do the scales, then we're going to see how it looks. Turn off that, move in, zoom in, and we're going to go to slash. We're going to start it off here. We're going to kind of come in like that, kind of from where the scutes are. And kind of come around. I'm going to draw them as separate little lines. Drawing a couple circles just to define the start of all of this for the eyes. And then we're going to just draw in, draw in the scales down each path. Yes, this is a very long and tedious thing, but as I said, because we have this as a predefined figure, our figure is already prepared for rigging and posing. This means that we don't have to redo this every time we change the pose or we prepare the figure. So because of that, we're doing the usual bit that I like to do of spending a bit more time on the front end to save time on the back end. Now, under normal circumstances, you won't need more than one pose of a Tarrasque. Now, when we turn on our bio details, you can see how the scales are interacting with the wrinkles around the eye. It's not obvious at first, but you can see it better when I turn it on. And then we're going to do something similar at the nose. Because what we need to do is we need to make sure that this nose kind of vanishes into nothingness, because it's going to be dark. So we're going to start off kind of following a bit of a bit with the scutes around the nostrils. we're going to draw these simply because we do have that problem of it's not symmetrical on the other side. Then we're going to come down from here. Then we're going to draw a little dot, and we're going to kind of draw in a little spiral. No, little buddy, not yet. I got the tablet in my hands, in my lap. Whatever. And then we're going to go ahead. Let's make this a little bit stronger than default. 1, 2. Pull that back. Yeah. But you can see how this is going to be. We're going to try to have these scales follow the flow of the muscles, which means no. Let's get the mouse a good bit bigger, just for demonstration purposes. The scales are kind of going to flow in a pattern kind of along the muscles. Now the reason for this, that we're going to do this like that, and then of course they're going to, the reason for this is because think of it like a mesh or mail, you know, when you and you want the hinges, so to speak, to be going in the direction that you move and in the direction that the body part swells, which in this case the swell is the same as the, you know, or perpendicular to the direction of movement. Okay. Oh, I gotta stretch. Pardon me. Hello, Emilio. It will probably be for purchase, but it won't be for very much. What it will probably be, because this is already pre-articulated, I have it where I can make it any pose. I will have two poses, like I said. One perhaps more of a running pose, and one more of a standing fighting pose. Like the Giants that I did for my Kickstarter, which is down below, right below me. I will probably have it in a version that is 100% solid, no, full-size piece that you'd probably need like a CR10 or another large format printer to make in one shot. A chopped up version that can be done on smaller printers down to and including the Anycubic Photon, since that's my current printer choice for miniatures, and a version chopped up and hollowed out for the resin printers. I'm not sure how I'm going to handle the torso. It might be too big for the resins, but yeah. But it would be like $3 or $4. Anyway, by having the more subcutaneous details on a separate layer that I currently have as bio details, it makes it a lot easier to put the scales on and give it some heavy detail. And then most of the skin is going to have a detail roughly similar to what you're seeing on the head here. The joints will have fewer scutes, and the larger, flatter areas will have more. The shell, I'm probably going to give it more of a stone-like texture, whereas the claws and the horns and the teeth are going to have more of a linear groove type texture, because effectively horns and fingernails are the same thing, and you've got a linear texture to your fingernail. You may not realize it. If you look very carefully, you'll see that those linear growths. Look at a cow horn, you'll see linear growth down the length of the horn. Anyway, it is already 9:15. I don't think I'm going to be able to get much more than perhaps, say, the lip area with these scales. So let me shrink this back down. And now let's get to drawing in some scales on the lip. Oh, too big. And I'm going to have to turn on X until I get to turn off symmetry, because I kind of screwed up symmetry. But I'm going to draw both this side and the other side. What we're going to do is we're going to draw in a few smaller scales around the base of these scutes, and then we're going to follow along underneath. And then draw in our little scale separators. We want it more like the ones around the eye than like the ones in the gap in here. And we want to try to keep them roughly, not necessarily perfect squares, but definitely not extremely elongated. So when we get to areas like this lip, they're going to get a little bit larger, but they're also going to be more clearly scales and not scutes. And then they're going to be smaller here, and then get to a little bit wider and larger as we get closer to the fatter areas, and then they shrink again. We're going to kind of come around this way with this scale row, because the scales, like I said, will follow certain patterns, certain aspects. In this case, they're following the skull almost. The same thing happens with what's called edge loops. Edge loops are in a modeling term, and it's basically, the concept is that the edges of your polygons should make lines and loops that define the direction of motion. Now what I'm doing, like I said, this is not the neatest and coolest way of doing it, but it is a more solid way. Let me drawing in a little secondary scales in between these scutes, because there's a nice big gaps in between them. Okay. lot of times there'll be circumstances where what you're working on looks bad. And it will until you get to a point where all of a sudden it starts looking good. That sounds odd, but it's true. Now, obviously, we're not going to be putting any scales into the mouth area, because that's actually muscle, and it's actually bare skin in there. And then let me go ahead and put that there, and then one thing I've mentioned in the past is get a vague general knowledge of anatomy. Good old Neil deGrasse Tyson has been known to say, in reference to science fiction authors, once you know the rules, that's when you can bend them. So, for example, knowing the basics of science and then applying it in new and interesting ways is what made Arthur C. Clarke and Isaac Asimov so amazing. You turn around and you read a science fiction story about a species whose atmosphere explodes on contact with radiation, like what's coming in from space from 99% of the universe, and it just makes you go, what? I don't think I need to define who that was who wrote that particular story, except to say that people who follow him have a compound in that we're going to put in some scales. Okay, we're going to draw in some scales over here. Okay. Now, I'm going to take a brief pause to get some soda. Anyway, the point was, the same is true of anatomy. Once you know the basic rules of anatomy, how things work, the basics on how biomechanics get things done, then you can start breaking the rules to start making things like this scale pattern. Scutes form in areas of low movement, in the harder areas, in the more rigid zones. So we place them where they're less likely to form, or more likely to form, rather. And then we put the more flexible butted scales in areas where they're more likely to form. I'm told this is incorrect, but it's a good way to imagine it. Imagine it as if you put a coat of a rigid lacquer on the surface of a reptile. And then as it goes about its day, areas where it moves, that lacquer cracks a lot. Areas it doesn't move, the lacquer doesn't really crack. And so you get your scutes and your scales. Excuse me, I got hiccups. like on human beings, we would be more likely to, for example, for like a dragonborn character, because they're roughly human shaped, more likely to develop scutes on, well, mostly on like the collarbone area, the shoulder blades, areas like your knee bone, behind your knee, the sides of your chest where you're breathing constantly would probably develop smaller scutes, but areas that are moving all the time, like your underarms, your neck, and your face, would develop small scales. By the way, Neil deGrasse Tyson is totally rocks. He's freaking awesome. And if my mentioning him causes him to get a chance to take a look at what I'm doing, thank you! Yes, that was a thank you to Neil deGrasse Tyson. Because, like, I love science, and while I may do fantasy for a living, I'm basing my fantasy off of science as much as I can reasonably do. Okay. Oh, just to show you how it looks. It's working nicely in with the rest of it. What we got? Emilio, because I had almost the entire half of the face done and realized I accidentally turned off mirroring and I didn't want to have to completely redo it all. You're gotta wait. You also have to remember, I can't do anything to increase the poly count in this project because it's a morph, not a custom, not a finished product. This is a modification of an existing item at this point. Okay, what I really need to do, turn on X, and then kind of come around with just a vague side cut. Because what'll happen is I can then, and then from here, I can do my asymmetric until I get to there. Okay. Now, let's bring this back and around. Like I said, it takes a lot longer to do this level of detail because you almost have to draw on every single piece of work. And then we're going to come around, draw in a couple of these scales. And I can understand if you don't like the style. Apparently it's not for everybody. The overall intent behind these is that these are being sculpted to be for use in a tabletop environment. Giants and dragons are as variable as trolls. Some people like giants that are just a human figure scaled up a few hundred times. Others prefer something a bit more stylized. And so what I do, I like what I do, and other people don't like. That's entirely their option. Adding in some scales between the scutes. I kind of need to increase this intensity. Yeah. So I'm not having to force it as much. I can draw them a little bit faster. Okay. See, the thing is, with the scutes and deciding which ones will have little points, that's actually dependent. Number one, it needs to be kind of semi-random. Not all of them will have it, because otherwise they stop looking like scutes and start looking like armadillo quills, olive sharper, or hedgehog. We don't want a hedgehog Tarrasque. Okay. And the other is, again, they would develop where there is less movement. So, like at the corners of the jaw, yeah, you're more likely to get fewer points. But down here, you're more likely to get more. You'd get some down over here. But they also would be, in the head area, they would tend to be worn down. Because you're sticking its head into inside the body of its prey to get at the soft, juicy bits. So you wouldn't get the large pointy scutes as much on the snout area, for example, just as an example. Alright, I'm going to hide this hand because it's getting in the way. Alright. Now, mark out these scales. Okay. Now we're going to turn back on the daggum symmetry. Yay! We're going to come around up here because this is an area where it's going to be more scale than skewed. And again, we're going to turn it off again to make sure we get this right, because this is an area near the centerpiece, center of the center line of the figure, and we don't want it to be blatantly obvious that we have a symmetry. We're going to come under here. We want the symmetry to be mostly on the sides, and any area near the center line kind of gives away that there is that symmetry. Real things have symmetry on the macro scale, not as much on the micro. That means is like, yes, humans are bilaterally symmetric, except our hearts are tilted. They're in the center, but they're kind of tilted this way. Except your eyes will be slightly different shapes. Your nostrils will be slightly different shapes. If you took a photograph and mirrored it, it wouldn't look quite exactly like the same person. Okay, now, let's zoom out. And right now, if we look at the head, and we turn on our bio details, yeah. Okay, now let's turn off bio details. And we're going to scale underneath the neck. Now this is an area, since this area of the neck with the bio details on turns into a waddle, it's not going to be as blatant that it's symmetrical. So we're just going to go ahead and draw in some layered layers for the scales, and then kind of and then we're going to just draw in here, following the path of these little and then we're going to make them a little bit longer than they are wide. A little bit wider than they are long. Because they're going to stretch. Now again, let's zoom out, and let's see how it looks with bio details on. Yeah, there we go. That is the head of the Tarrasque. Now, let's look in. Some of these scutes with the growths on them, maybe add in some more right about here, but not a lot. We're going to use the inflate tool for it. And we're going to focal shift it down and then we're just gonna come around and no, turn it off. Okay. I'm just gonna draw on just a little bit right in here. We're also gonna come over here. We're gonna make it a bit more pointy. And these are not symmetric, so I gotta remember that when I put it in there and there. A little bit more over here. Okay, now we're going to zoom out. This on the head. Well, let's go ahead and add in the bio details because it is part of what we did today. This is what took us about an hour and a half to do today. It takes a long time to do detail sculpting, and we're not even anywhere near done with the face yet. Now, the thing to remember is that the shell has to be done. It's not going to be done to look like scutes. The shell itself is actually going to be done to resemble almost like a stone or a rough iron ore. And we're going to be adding in some, we're going to exaggerate the groove underneath the shell where it meets the skin. But I hate to say it, but that's going to be for before the next show. That is basically how I draw the actual things. The start of the next broadcast that's not a Patreon broadcast, it's going to be on next Tuesday. I'm going to show the finished version of the full detail sculpt. And then I'm going to show how I bring that into the articulated figure as a high definition blend shape. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to save this as a subtool. I'm going to go back to 3D printing, meshes, Tarrasque, sculpt, HD scales, Tarrasque HD details subtool. And this is going to not take as long as you'd think because it's saving in a binary format. OBJ and STL are both text-based formats. There is a binary format for both, but it's not as universally recognized. There's an OBJ format for what are called NURBS surfaces. It's not universally recognized. It's not used by as many programs. So let me go ahead and pop back to here. And, Okay, so that was the basics on detailing, how I'm using a layer in ZBrush for the more biological subcutaneous details like those tendons and neck muscles and the wrinkles of the skin itself, which let me pull up an image of a Komodo dragon and you'll see what I'm looking for, what I'm talking about rather. Always have images. I can't pull this one directly into the images I have. I'm not going to be pulling directly into the broadcast simply because it's not how to put this. I don't have the rights to the images. So if you do a Google image search for Komodo dragon or iguana. You know, I mean, heck, let me go ahead and pull up this one of the Denver Zoo. This is Komodo dragon of the Denver Zoo, and if you look right here, you can see it's got those wrinkles. It's got much smaller scales, but again, it's got larger scales where it doesn't articulate as much, and thinner scales, smaller scales where it does. It's got thicker scales along the forearm than it has on the hands. And it's in bands. They move in the direction that the critter moves. Hey Citrain, how's it going? So basically the scales are going to be grids. Well, have a wonderful night, Emilio. It's 9:45 already. It's 15 minutes till 10. It's not exactly that short of a show this time. And like I said, the start of Tuesday will be me bringing in that high-definition morph and showing what the final result looked like. And then posing the Tarrasque, shifting up to the high-definition morph, and exporting it to be refined for 3D printing. Now, one thing to remember, there's no way I'm going to be able to do that level of detail in 100,000 triangles. Most of it would be erased. A lot of slicers have problems when you get around 1 million polygons, but that's going to be about how big this is going to be. Which means, you know, the chopped up versions are going to be easier to handle in the slicer. You're not going to watch the Patreon sculpts on Sunday, Emilio? I realize I haven't been doing them as often, but the combination of the chaos of Mom going into physical therapy at a short-term stay facility, so I'm, you know, I don't have to take care of her right now, but there's a whole brouhaha there, and then me getting migraines the past couple weeks. Yay. Oh, and of course, Sunday I was called to a superb owl party. You know, we played Munchkin and didn't once turn on the television. Okay. Shinju. Come on, girl. Yep. Good girl. Yes. That's my 13-year-old. Now, as usual, what I'm going to do now, I'm going to hold up my hand. This is because of the whole lag nonsense on YouTube. Well, I'm going to refresh the page just to make sure I don't have any lag from that. But I'm going to hold up my hand, and I'm going to count down to 1, and I'm going to say something stupid, and then I'm going to log out. Alright? So, that's going to be a 5, a 4, a 3, a 2, and a 1. Something stupid. Yeah, I know I said I wasn't going to do that joke again, but hey! Hi, Mark. Good night, Mark.